You're looking well, okay?
Yep. Yeah.
So, good morning, everybody. Visitors today, but morning, council staff and councillors. This meeting has been held in person at Sutherland, not recorded by audio visual conference. All members participating via video conference will count the meeting forward in accordance with clause 25B of Schedule 7 to the Local Government Act 2002. This meeting has been live streamed to Council's YouTube channel. Great, so apologies, have we got any apologies from
Yes.
So we've got an apology from Kitch. So can I have a mover to accept the apologies? Thank you, Alex, and second, Colin, all in favour? Aye. Aye. Very much. So moving on to A2, do we have any conflicts of interest today? So there are no conflicts of interest and no participation, and therefore no actions from public participation. And now we're going to go into A6. Sorry. Extraordinary business. And yes, that's okay. So we have an item for extraordinary business today, item C1, Appendix 1. So it's not on the agenda due to a delay in confirming data for significant risk register that cannot be deferred to the next meeting. It's best practice to have most updated information available prior to the election of the new council. So can I move to add item C1 to the agenda? Thank you, Jenny. So okay, Brenda, all in favour? Yes, so everybody going to have a copy of what's been presented. Yeah, we've got fixtures.
It's on the seller.
Thank you. So is anybody if you want to go back to something, start to do that. Okay. So before we move on to this, can I have someone to recommend that we confirm the minutes from the meeting on the 22nd of June? Thank you. The seconder, thank you. And all in favour? Aye. The motion is passed. Excellent. So we can now.
I just saw a chat from Harry and I wanted to make sure it wasn't saying anything new. He just noted that if it's bandwidth goes down, he'll turn his camera off. So we've been working on a significant risk register for a few months. So we started with the framework that we were going to use, called government assessment, which kind of guides the level of risk and mitigation you need in place depending on the size and scope of your organisation. And then we went back to the original risk register and had a bit of a review. I took that review to ELT last week and we debated all the ups and downs and ins and outs and the scores using the template that's in the back. So there's a little bit of an appendix in the back that says the likelihood of definitions, consequences, And then it gives you the risk matrix and sees how you score the overall risk rating. We do need to do further work on our mitigations. And the idea going forward is that we will bring a report to FAR on a regular basis. We've yet to determine that, and it'll be interesting to hear your perception on how often you would like to see that report. So each risk owner would do a summary of had the risk rating changed and an update on the mitigation. So had we implemented any new mitigations, were any of the mitigations requiring any updates? So that's kind of where we're at. I realise you guys have got this very late, but I think it's a good stepping stone. It's a work in progress. We'll treat it as a living document, and I welcome feedback or individual conversations if you would like more detail at another point in time to consider further.
And actually, I'd like to just remind everyone that it was slightly earlier than we anticipated.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to
Can't complain about that.
Really good. So has anybody got any comments they'd like to wish to remember?
I've just got one I made on the crisis management response and the current mitigations and mitigations development. Have we done the staff training to allow staff to be represented on a district emergency management operation?
So the training, I believe, Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, is 10th of August, and I think it's about 3 or 4 of us registered for that training.
So
Other people.
if someone that qualifies them to sit on, now during COVID, all our staff were ejected because they didn't have the necessary training to sit, and we were left out of some decisions as a result.
Yeah.
So that's the crucial that we have and I'm just not seeing it specifically mentioned in the mitigations.
We can be a bit more specific about it. Because we know that's the correct training that we need to go on for that purpose.
Yeah, it's a training that occurs throughout the year. It's run by Remo. We've asked for greater transparency and of the training schedule, because the training reports tend to be staggered throughout the year, and we don't get more notice. We've currently got about a dozen people within council trained into specific desk functions. I'm controller for South Africa, and also operate across 3 councils in case of COVID. But that was a very recent thing, and I wasn't operational at the time of COVID, as you pointed out. So there have been some recent changes, but we are trying to identify other individuals to come in and also be trained. So that's the current setup.
Through you, Madam Chair. Talking about the crisis management response, there seemed to be kind of like a disconnect between the council and our communities, and that was obvious during COVID. It's not reflected in here. It is reflected on what council's going to do themselves, but it does actually show how they're going to communicate with the communities.
A very valid point, actually, council. With so the focus today has been about internal capability and capacity building. The next stage is about our interactions with the community and how we empower and support the community during times of crisis. That would be the next step.
Thank you. JP.
Well, then obviously my question was, some pretty good groups like Ferry, Maori Ratepayers Association, they need to be working on this, because if there's an emergency, you may not be able to get there first.
Yeah, it's about, you're quite right, Councillor. It's actually about how we mobilise those local community groups. We've seen it quite recently with our work with, whilst it's not an emergency management per se, managed through Remo, with the Pinnacle Road response. We set up an internal response group to manage that response, and work with local groups to help manage certain elements of it. So that's absolutely, yeah.
think Alex had a
Yes.
question.
On that, it would be really interesting. Since COVID, there have been some initiatives in a lot of government master that, you know, with the Palliser and also the remote training at those rural areas with regards to the protocol under civil defence, which is now taken to. So it'd be really interesting to map that and look at where the weaknesses still are. But I think a lot has moved positively into the actions.
Yes, certainly from an emergency management point of view, I've been involved with the defence in terms of the emergency management over many years. And I apologise because I haven't thoroughly read this document. I've scanned it and that's all I've done. So my question to you is, how can we engage and involve the community as elected representatives in making sure that if it's a Featherston or a Raytown or a Mount Mara incident within those confines of those boundaries, how can we be inclusive in getting the message out to those?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think the past response has been just simple communication. Rather than now we need to interact and consult and engage with the community to bring them on board and to mobilise them when we have issues. So we see in a nice sort of way, we utilise them as a resource to help address emergencies on a localised level.
So in terms of bringing them up to speed effectively, and I guess advising them about what their responsibilities are in the event of something occurring, how would you communicate?
That would be likely to have conversations first and foremost with the community board and how best to engage with them at a local level. But other groups, community groups, or anyone else that's because if you think about Remo as offering the framework, we then adapt that framework to a localized level. And so it's not a phrase of vanilla one size fits all approach. We've got to look at how it best fits within our local community response.
I mean, for example, we'll call the Rotary with streams up for during the early stages of the pandemic. There's groups out there in the community that speak.
Indeed. I mean, we have the likes of volunteering for example, based in Carlton, because they're not based in our district, doesn't mean that we can't draw upon them to mobilise other groups.
Chair, I'm quite sure that Remo have the responsibility for the information sharing and preparedness of our rural community. It's not us. So it's the link that we can assist with.
It is. So yes, we have a desk function that is about connectivity of community groups. However, applying that on a local level, it might not be an emergency that is managed in Remo, but there's still community groups that we need to engage with in a localised crisis.
With this, with this, I don't see any connection between this and councillors. I think this is what you were saying the officers are going to do. But there's no involvement with council, and councillors have a skill set that they can use either in the hub or helping in the centre in Masterton if they have the right extra training that's needed. And so I think this needs to be an inclusive document for those people as well, because otherwise, as everyone's been saying, there's a disconnect between council staff and the rest of the community. And if you're looking at saying things to the community board, but you're missing this level of expertise, and some of us, like Colin and myself, have been doing civil defence and Remo for a number of years.
The intent is certainly to be inclusive, councillor. As you will recollect from when we had the COVID response, we reached out to the councillors and asked if there was any capacity, ability to actually help support those activities. So that from an operational perspective, the intent is certainly to draw on any and all resources available to us that we can mobilise.
think the other thing to be mindful of through you, Madam Chair, apologies, is that this is a governance document. It's not an operational delivery document. So the idea is that as governance, you have oversight of the risks that we're managing, that you have confidence in how they're being managed, that the operational delivery rests with Carrie and us as you know, operations of council. Absolutely can agree that your role in as community experts and connectors will be taken absolutely as part of that and in that communications. But we probably see that in a communications strategy or in an engagement strategy as part of emergency management, and that's not the purpose of this document to guys even down to that detail.
It's multitude of risks, it's not just one, everybody's focusing
On one.
Yeah.
No, I understand that the other, yeah, we were talking about all the things that we know risk.
Yeah.
You know,
So just to take note point, which I think is obvious that councillors need and want to be included in particularly with this elements that have significant impact.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I just really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm just, I can't emphasise enough the importance of a document like this, given what we're confronted with, we're going to be confronted with, we're currently being confronted with years to come. And I see you've got climate change as a big feature, and I think that's critical. You know? It's also critical, I think, in terms of reporting back to council. It is an operational measure to a large extent. Obviously, you as the controller or council officers make decisions every day, mitigating risks that may occur.
Through you, Madam Chair, in the context of climate change, our climate change officer Melanie came into that separate piece of work around the risk and resilience of council assets. So there's a whole lot of kind of layers of work that sit underneath this. We've got the, you know, just talked about emergency management. We have an emergency management plan that sit underneath this. Climate change, we've got risk and resilience strategy that would sit under this. So we'd expect layers of operational management to sit at the really high level.
Fantastic.
I think Alex,
Cool. So on legislative regulation, in the mitigations, what I'd like to see is legal advice on the legality of the change that's being requested. Because occasionally I think we are told we can do this, but at what point to trigger significance for consultation, it becomes my concern, as opposed to making wholesale changes to the way we do things without talking about it.
Through you, Madam Chair, part of the reason that we've listed our membership with Kaitoa and our GNZ is because we often don't have the resource to get independent legal advice, and those organisations often will do that for us.
So it might be the collation you're seeking of.
Yeah, okay.
I'd love that to be noted that we are looking, are we acting legally in certain changes that may be requested of us?
Cool. I'll add that.
Yeah, look, given this document has only just come out, I think the key to it is that it is a living document. And once we've had time to digest it, that changes the group, you know, everything's changing.
Yeah.
and I think that really important to remember that it's a living document. And I personally love the idea that different groups within a ELT will report back to us, explain why it may have moved in its risk status and what's changed, because that was the real thing we was looking for. Just kind of a little point, and I'm not meaning to be provocative. When I looked at the governance report that we got earlier, and subsequently this one, I know you've noted that the risk register is in no particular order. I would like to see the order that you consider to present the priorities, because I would like to see a political agenda made certainly visualised to the top. when in reality for us as a council, our high-risk areas may not be the same, and it's, you know, sometimes when these reports are collated, with the cut and paste onto the big stuff, it becomes then what is real is disgusting. Yeah. And I noted that, for example, in the earlier report, a relationship between the and Papa and Mari was top, and I know you said it was in no particular order, but in my view, there are other things which present greater risk council. So, as I said, I don't want to be provocative, I just would prefer it to be in some sort of order that represents others.
Through you, Madam Chair, a simple way of doing that would be to use a risk rating. So just do the analysis of where the risk falls up. I use the inherent risk, which is a risk after we've taken the mitigations, and just rank them. I don't know if Harry has anything to add to that idea. We can't hear you, Harry.
Yeah. So remember, we're focusing on the sort of top 10 risks for the whole, and you'll see most of them are extreme in terms of residual risk. So the danger in a ranking system is people ignore the ones at the bottom and focus on the top end. You've got to focus on all of the risks all of the time. I understand what you're saying, Lee, but they will change. So we'll have a look at it and see what we can do. But the whole point is, I suppose the first question here is, you've got to have comfort that these are the key risks that the council faces. And that's the governance thing. So the first conversation is, anything you think we're missing here? I think these are, we've tested across a lot of local government organisations, other councils, and this seems to be the common range of themes. There's nothing here that would be very specific to us other than the point of emphasis around them because of the impact of some of these. But yeah, look, we'll have a think, but the danger is you don't want to end up with a ranking and then everyone ignores the bottom end of it. You just focus on the top end.
I can appreciate that, Harry. I mean, I think as Amanda suggesting, it is ranked according to high risk versus low risk. That it's very definition change on a regular basis. So it allows us to focus on the highest risk, but you saw where I was coming from.
100%.
I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't trying to be provocative.
No, that's helpful. That's exactly it. But I mean, the point is, we're trying to keep them to the really high level and the most significant risks. And so, yeah, there is an inherent danger in ranking them too closely, where, as I said, people focus on the top 3 and forget about the other 7. And you're better to be actually over all 10 all of the time, because the mitigations change. That's the point. So the residual risk will change.
Okay, Colin.
I just have one final thing here. Obviously, this has been compiled with the ELT team, and it's been brought over priority 10. So your role basically as ELT will be activated if identified as a risk and as the event occurs. You know, so I guess as long as we're getting information, no surprises. Then obviously become.
And I think we could probably manage 10, looking at 10 risks.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Through the Madam Chair, for response, ELT plan to quarterly review these. So we'll have a deep dive on them every quarter. And that way, I think they'll have a fresh approach at least.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for answering my question.
So, sorry, Colin, just to add to that, remember, no surprises are not about just the strategic risk, it's the operational risks. So if something happens at an operational level, we are always sending you notes, letting you know what's happening and that kind of stuff. So I take your comment, but you know, our practice is to make sure that you're informed of the operating risks and things that are issues that are emerging, those types of things. So I think it's important to note.
Fantastic, thank you, Harry.
So on that basis, then your intention would be to present all the cases,
If that's acceptable, if that's what you feel, I think the next meeting would be good to give you the template for the report and a first look at mitigation for the big table. And that might help alleviate some of the questions that you had, Councillor Winsor. And then from there quarterly, if that is acceptable.
So what is everybody think around the table about quarterly versus a refund?
Given that 3 years ago we did this, and all this, and given that the information here is incredibly valuable to our government and council expenditure. So yes, we don't want to overload it, but if I could continue though, on regulatory failure, liability consenting, is there a capacity or capability with the council to look at historical risk, review of historical risks? Because there have been subdivisions and other consenting in the past that may not, that would make the council liability.
I will do that question to Harry because it's not my area of expertise. Harry, he's turned his camera off, so don't know if he's still there.
An example, in a case in point, is Marston District Council being sued for consenting 4, 5, 6, 7 years later.
Yes.
On something that they didn't realise was an issue.
Yeah.
So just the review of that, Harry.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I just missed the first part of that little dog.
So is there a capacity or is there an ability to put a historical risk review of areas where in the past we may have liability as opposed to going forward?
I think it's really hard, Alex. I'm not sure. So theoretically, once a consent has been issued, for instance, on an activity, then it does remove liability. If the consent has been issued without all the relevant information, then you're in trouble. I'm not sure that we retrospectively could review every consent and every building consent to identify.
But it might be if there's someone said 10 years ago that was a problem. You know, is there a register to put it in going, we know that and we might need to look into it. And the example, the case in point is Marston being sued for poorly constructed buildings and the emerging risks and their need to prepare for the court cases with the trust up in Marston. Yeah, that's a historical risk that emerged.
Another one would be the Taradale development in Greytown, where there was some concern that it had been signed off at a full council meeting, and that became historical risk, which going forward could have been
Slightly different risks to what I was referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, look, let me have a think, and I have a talk to the Russell and the team about how we could identify any potential residual risk in those areas. I don't think it's a simple.
No, I don't think it is. That's
simple
right.
Exercise. That's all. I'll just have to have a think about it. Yeah.
That's why I prefaced my question with, do we have the capacity or capability? You know, and
So,
I'd love it to be noted.
Yeah, we'll have a look at it. But I mean, at the end of the day, you know, your biggest mitigation in that area is you follow the MB guidelines, you follow you know, your procedures in terms of what the law requires you to do. If you vary from the law or take shortcuts, that's where your risk really happens. And yeah, so look, I'll have a think about it. But you know, one of the things that we constantly get comment about is the rigor that we apply to things like our building consents. And that's exactly the kind of thing that mitigates the potential risk of taking shortcuts.
And we've got till now a very good reputation. Certainly we haven't had any red cards in that area.
And we do, and equally, we have an accreditation process in the building consent area that applies every 3 years. And so that takes case files, it looks at the decision making, applies against legislation, those types of things. So there's an independent scrutiny of our processes and systems down to the nth degree, which you'll be aware. So you know, in terms of a mitigation, it's actually not a bad one.
And in fact, other councils have not done as well in that regard as we have. So that their liability is potentially greater.
Yeah, and that's correct. I mean, there's times where, and I'll name this, I won't mention the particular councils, but they failed their accreditation, and it was about the same time that some of the issues have occurred. So that is your strength, is actually making sure people follow the best processes, that we deal promptly with any issues that arise that are identified through the accreditation process and maintain. That is the quality control that MB provide over the building control function. And so, you know, yeah.
And while some people might complain our consent processes may be slightly longer or more complicated, the results are better as a result of that due diligence. So,
Yeah.
thank you, Harry. Brenda, did you?
No. I was just going to compliment the work that's been done on this. It's lovely, it's clear, it's precise, gives us a timeline of when we might expect things. Because we've got the ball rolling now.
Thank you. And I'd just like to reiterate that because I think this is significant. We've been on the case about this for coming up 3 years, and I'm really thrilled that we're even training with this. What to be work in progress, of course, but the real structure around it. It's great work. Thank you. I really most appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to also congratulate the commander of the team for this work and the obviously and this was also an outstanding audit point. So the auditors will be extremely pleased that they have addressed this. And we wanted that this was happening and we have it to give to them as well. Excellent. So,
I think it's great when being able to work in a very collaborative manner. Across governance, corporation, and this. And I think it's been really just having a few delays to get the results. Much better.
Thank you.
Well done.
So, I'm sorry, is the next step to bring this to council or just to say that we
I don't know what you plan to present for the next council meeting, but I'll be very comfortable to say this is where we want to land on. And then the next step, I think, what's the date of the exit team of our meeting is supporting. Yeah, so you present really ready.
Happy to do that.
So Madam Chair, just would it be prudent to move a recommendation that the LT present this to FAR on a quarterly basis? I think we need a resolution on this. So it's a recommendation to the council.
Yes, because we're all in agreement. And obviously there is significant risk that imposed no surprise across the area. So I'd like to move that the ELT present strategic risk register on a quarterly basis to FAR. Can I have you the seconder and the and in favour?
you say, Harry?
So I would like to move on to the policy and governance report. And can I have a member to receive policy and governance report? Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. So the first point is just around the significant risk register, which we've already discussed. The second one is just to let you know that the residence section survey has been completed. We are waiting on benchmarking. That's needed. So it was conducted by Key Research, and they just want to get all their councils done before they do benchmarking, and that will form the part of the annual report, which is our non-financial performance indicators or KPIs. And so we're just on track with that piece of work.
Can I just, can you just remind me the initial report? The results.
we were going to just do it as part of the annual report. Yeah, the context makes sense when you put it in the annual report as a standalone document. It's can create risk that's unnecessary.
Sorry, just.
So just to clarify, this is exactly the same process we followed last year. Remember the survey is to inform the annual plan. We have a number of KPIs that are related to satisfaction and what people consider about our services. So we need to do it. We must do it in conjunction with our annual report. Ideally, we'd love to have, like a number of councils have an annual report that's actually produced in September, October, and it makes it far more relevant. So we're caught with the auditors actually in terms of their ability to actually process the information to give us an audit report. We always end up at the end of the tree. We need to have discussion next year about how we can move that process forward so that we are putting timely information out to the community. And I would be suggesting we probably need to change our auditors. But that's another story. But the point is that it's to inform the annual plan. The timing of the annual plan is unfortunately driven by the audit timetable, which is really terrible. We're not happy with it.
And I'm assuming you at this stage want to continue with Kiwi research because they've done a really good job and seemed it was worthwhile going through the exercise and looking at our previous opportunities.
Yeah, please. My comments were not intended as a reflection on the research. They've done a fantastic job for us.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
It's just the timing. Ideally, as I said, we'd love to have it's all out and the annual report by September. But a number of councils are able to achieve that, particularly places like Pororua and the ones that have used not Pete Marwick, used Ernst Young as an auditor, and they've been able to do that. Audit New Zealand is under the pump in terms of capacity and capability. It's driving Curran absolutely nuts, and driving us all nuts. But it is what it is, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
Just a quick question on benchmarking. What are you benchmarking against?
Other councils.
Other councils rather than previous.
So we already do our internal previous, like key research, look at the previous. So that the last piece they did was our kind of our setting. This is what the set is. I think we had some changes in questions. So there's legislative requirements against non-financial key performance indicators. So they're legislated, they're written, and we have to measure those things. And we had some gaps so that we needed to fill. So key research has done a really good job. The previous surveys we had done didn't quite meet all our requirements. So that was tidied that up. Some data sets are really tiny, so we've not got high quality data. So for example, there is a question around level of iwi satisfaction with particular services. So we've asked people to identify their ethnicity and then if Māori, which iwi they belong to, and that would then give us an iwi indicator, and that cohort is very, very tiny. So that's probably not going to give us robust enough information. So we're going to need to find some other mechanisms for some of that feedback. So that's a bigger piece that I've had a conversation with ELT around perception surveys, one way of finding out these things, but we've probably got other indicators that we could use to help us build a better picture around level of resident satisfaction.
Thank you. Happy with that.
Yeah, I just quite like to see a pure document, in terms of the survey. I know we're benchmarking against this, but just its purity in terms of you just mentioned about iwi.
Yeah.
And it may have been only been a small survey scale with iwi, for instance, but it could represent a bigger picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Just a quick one about it. Are we provided with the names of the other councils we can use?
Yes.
So we can look at smaller rural councils.
Yes, and that's part of key research's role is to look at comparisons. So we're not comparing ourselves against Auckland, for example. Yeah. So, but they will do. So they will do. They name the candidates.
Looking around the EV feedback, it kind of begs the question, why are we not involving our marriage standing committee? With regards to that process of identifying.
So part of, through you, Madam Chair, the part of the methodology in a research project like this is it's randomised. So they've got a whole key researchers, a whole methodology around random residents. So we're not necessarily getting people with a particularly strong opinion. Now, in saying that, that was my point around we need a fuller picture. So we do need some other data sets that will help us build that fuller picture. And I absolutely acknowledge that we need to work with the Māori Standing Committee around gathering good quality engagement processes so we can tell other stories that support the resident survey. But the resident survey has to be a pure research team.
And that, I understand, I totally get that point. However, if we're making in particular areas, then we're going to need to provide.
Yeah, and we did do that with this survey. So we did send it out. We asked key research about how we build our response with EWI, and they did send it out to via the Māori Standing Committee to our marae, and that they were given an opportunity to participate separately as well. So we did do that, but we did it completely and utterly through key research doing that contact us. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, one of the issues is if you want, as Colin said, you want the comparator, you've got to have a common methodology that's applied across all councils to provide the benchmark. If you do a number of bespoke kind of conversations, it can paint, it'd be useful for us to know, but in terms of a comparator with other councils, they wouldn't use the same methodology. So it's a balance.
It skews the data. It doesn't provide relevant data in our ability to benchmark.
This is just one tool, I think that's actually.
And it's not to say that at some point in the future there might be other market research that you might choose to do to try and improve that area.
So through you, Madam Chair, there are other mechanisms that we can use pretty easily that we're going to start looking at. So, for example, social media metrics, website metrics, our complaints and confidence processes. But if we start to build a picture alongside the research, it will help us know where we are with that broader conversations.
So do you want to just talk us through the review program?
Yes.
And I just again like to compliment you on the work you're doing. I think we're making some strides. And thank you again, Karen and Brenda, working this very
Sorry, my computer's just decided to shut itself down. I have to turn it back on again. So there's a little bit there around the governance work, but yeah, the policy review program, I cannot take credit for this. This is Steph's work. She has been doing an amazing job in organising where we're at and helping prioritise the work. And her and I came up with the idea of providing a table that would kind of lay out exactly the policy program of work and where we were at, and give you a regular report on progress. This is again a moving piece. There are every now and again something comes up that we weren't quite sure of or had to prioritise, and then we find out that there's a due date, a piece of legislation somewhere and it might stop. So this will be a living document as well. I don't know if anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, I'll just
No.
just one that I noted here. Is code of conduct.
Yes.
And that policy in particular, reviewing against the template, LT said template, and it's on track. There obviously was some concern and perhaps dissatisfaction amongst that people members, this training about the code of conduct.
Yes.
So where are we landing in that space in terms of?
So LGNZ and I believe it was the Office of the Auditor General did an independent review at the request of the Minister of Local Government to look at code of conducts across local government organisations, and that review basically stated there was inconsistencies, everyone was different, and that they really wanted to see, the recommendation was that they wanted to see a standardised approach to code of conduct across the country. They are working on a new template, Untitled and local governments together, having working on a new template. I don't think it's quite ready. They keep talking about it being ready for the new training. So at the beginning of the training, the councillors, newly elected councillors, have to approve the code of conduct. So our goal is to work with our new council elected members and have a updated version for the new training. And that might take, so there was some good feedback from the community boards, for example, around having a clearer treaty statement at the beginning of the document. So that was one of the things that they've given. And the other thing in the recommendations from the Office of the Auditor General was, we've currently got our code of conduct and investigation process all in one document. And I think they've recommended that those two things are separated out. And there is discussions about the any investigation to be managed by a national organisation of some type, that maybe it would be the Office of the Auditor General or the Ombudsman that would manage those investigations, but they haven't landed on anything. And I think that might require a change in legislation. So that's not nailed yet by any stretch, so we just recommendations.
So the incoming community boards and incoming council will work on it to finalise it rather than having a document signed about this morning.
I need to look at the legislation, because I think you do need to sign it quite quickly. So we might need to, so we've got a little bit of a gap between election and the first meeting, so we might have an opportunity to do some preliminary work around what that looks
Sorry,
like.
just to be clear on Amanda's comment, council is required to adopt a code of conduct. And so if there's a window to try and refine it, we take it. But you know, what we put up, either council is required to adopt the present code of conduct,
Yeah.
and then amend it later. But they have to adopt a code of conduct.
Yeah.
So what's on the table is a confirmed code of conduct is what council will be required to adopt.
Yeah. So we just would like to make a couple of recommendations on a couple of changes, and we want to look at the new template when it's released.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. With regards to the code of conduct, yes, we do have to adopt current conduct once you're sworn in. However, it can be changed at any time.
Yeah.
So it's just to relieve the pressure of having to do it ad hoc. But my question is, there are only 22 policies here on this paper of the 65 that originally existed. We don't actually have a view of what used to exist. I know what used to exist, I was at that time.
Yeah.
But we're looking at it now, but we haven't actually seen where we've come from and which ones have actually no longer need to be in front of us.
Okay. So there are still 60 something policies. They're on our website. That's our home of our policy documents. So that these are the ones that are most urgently required review. So the others that are on the website either reviewed recently enough or aren't pressing enough, either through legislation or audit requirement or a governance requirement that needs reviewing. So once we get to the end of this, it'll be like a rolling update. Once we've completed something, we'll put something else on the end of the list. I think it was just a manageable timeline for Steph to look at what she had and literature and what was most pressing.
It just gave the illusion that we've only got to.
No, that's we don't. All policies are on the website.
And also we did some audit, to see all of the requirements through the calls, so it was pressing ones that we had to.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
So, through you, Madam Chair, Councillor West, would it be helpful if you just had a little list at the bottom of the rest of the policies and everything?
Just so we know if there's something coming up that really piques our interest, we go, oh, I wouldn't mind having a look at that.
Cool. Yeah. We can just table a little list at the very bottom of all the policies and their due dates.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further questions, Rose? No, so, just before we move on to the action item report, and this is not noted in the agenda, but you would have seen an email, Karen, that because of the timing, we weren't able to have financials delivered to us this far, but I wonder, and I'm sorry, not really to put you on the spot, Karen, but do you have any comments or anything you want to mention to us?
Yes, Madam Chair. So this week we're hoping to look at this draft of the year-end accounts. So there's obviously a lot of work to get to that point. And we're hoping to schedule and bring to the next file meeting the draft accounts for the year-end that we will going to be publicly disclosed, because they will typically go to an auditor for review. So that is the current time draft accounts to the next due to lots of things, as we know, illness, the pandemic, staff shortages, and audit. New Zealand only just surviving. It's just been a huge backlog that we want to study. But the normal time frame for year-end accounts is still on track.
At this stage, are you able to comment if you can see any variations on what we anticipate or?
I could possibly comment at this point.
So, and I think everybody understood that was the time of the year. That's why
And I just Madam Chair, that's the same every year.
it's exactly. This is not unusual.
It's not unusual. And to that end, you won't get the current year's financial reporting until the previous year. Because in the previous year, the balances brought forward that impact the current year. So while we're still working through that. But I'm happy to report Charlie's back on the board. So that will hopefully
Great, thank you so much. So I'd like to move on to item C2, which is the action item. Thank you very much. Welcome. Can I have someone to receive the finance or the risk action items report? Thank you, Councillor Lees. And second, Gary, in favour, please say aye. So yes, really, I'll just see if anybody's got any questions around the action item. To bring.
I do need to declare that I haven't actually read it well.
But I'm sure that you will pass knowledge and that you will be able to stand on any issues immediately.
It's great.
Just because it's empty, don't add to it.
I don't intend to, Harry, but I was just going to see how we're getting on with the contract for Bonnie.
Bonnie Glen. No, look, I'll have to come back to you on that, Gordy. Sorry, Jeffy, I'm just not up on speed where that one's at.
Yeah. It's a bit of a burning issue.
It is. I mean, part of the issue is we've got very good contract prices, and so we're just trying to remember this is a 3-council thing. So we're working with all the other 3 councils to try and get a position that is advantageous to us all. So,
Yeah, it's Chair. Bonnie Glen as an issue is no longer there, as you can see in the notes. It's more what the government's changing with regards to race, costs associated with it.
yeah.
How we are able to adapt within our current contract.
And that's what our new zero waste environmental manager now will be bringing to assets and services to give everyone an update on what the current legislative frameworks are, what's happening, and that kind of work. So she's come up to speed and she's working on that report as we speak.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? Great work to keep the action items list quite small. So So now I'd like to move on to item D, which is public exclusion business. There is do I move it to move into public excluded business for the reasons outlined here? Thank you, Colin, thank you, Jimmy. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
I'd just like to make the following note that this resolution is made in lines in section 48, 1 of the Local Government Official Information in Meetings Act 1987, and particular interest or interests protected by section 6 or 7 of the Act, which would be prejudiced by holding the whole or relevant public proceedings of the meeting for the public as follows. So I think if we can Judy, Eric?